All right, well, good evening, folks. Thank you all for coming out, giving us part of your evening today, and giving us the opportunity to share with you the information that we have from what we've collected over the last several weeks. It's been a long and difficult summer for folks in New Braunfels, for our customers, and really for folks across the state of Texas, not just with the weather, but with how it's impacted energy prices. We've had a number of public meetings in the last few weeks, and got some terrific feedback from folks asking really good questions about what exactly is in this electric bill, how is the electric rate determined, what's going on in ERCOT, when is this going to change. And so what we did is we collected all that information, and we put together this presentation that hopefully will answer the questions that have been on your mind. And if we don't answer them, I think we've got about 50 to 70 employees here tonight that will be over here in the other room once we're done here. And so the opportunity to visit with just about every subject matter expert that we have at the utilities to help get whatever questions answered that I'm not able to do here with this presentation. The other thing I'll tell you about the presentation is that we shared it with a handful of folks over the course of the week, and it's kind of like an English paper, right? You could just continue working on it and working on it and working on it. At some point, you just got to turn the darn thing in. So even after this morning, we were all kind of powwowing in the office and thought, golly, if we'd done that differently, or too many charts, not enough tables, and that kind of thing. So truly, if it doesn't make sense what I'm saying, I hope you'll catch us in the back so we can explain this even further, because we really want to make sure that our customers understand all this information.
I think as long as you give us answers, we'll be fine.
Awesome. We got about 50 to 70. I can't remember how many are back there right now. So we'll have answers for you, ma'am. Appreciate that. So what I'm going to do is start with what is on my bill, right? Because that's really where this whole thing starts. And right now, the NBU bill is confusing. When you look at the line items, it does not make sense. So what I'm going to show you on this next slide is what we're going to do is show the different parts of the electric grid from generation all the way to the home and business, and then how each line item on the bill lines up with that piece of the electric grid, and then some ideas that we have for changing that. We really want to change that within the next month or two to make that a lot clearer. So here's the graphic that I was talking about. If you look over on the left, that first column there, those are representations of the electric grid, and really there's three main pieces of it. So the first, it all starts with the generators. And you have what you call the thermal generators, so that's gas and coal and nuclear. And you have the renewables, which is primarily wind and solar. And then from the generators, the power then goes into these big transmission lines, power transmission lines. And I'm sure y'all are familiar with those. Those are always overhead. And then from transmission, it gets down to the distribution system. And that's typically your local distribution system, the wires that you see driving down the road. It's a lower voltage than distribution. So if you look at those current bill items, the way it's listed, generation and transmission are covered under those two items there, purchase power and the power cost recovery adjustment, that four-letter acronym that is very confusing. So after this slide, I have a number of slides where we try to explain the PCRA in multiple ways, so by the time we get through all those slides, hopefully it makes sense. And then below that are the two items that we have on the bill for the distribution system, the delivery charge and the availability charge. So if you look over at the right, you can see some of the labels that we've been considering that try to make sense. And please give us your feedback on this when we go to the back of the room when this is all over. Because like I said, we'd like to move forward with a change on this pretty quick. So what we're proposing is breaking out that purchase power and that PCRA into three main things. One is generation. And you're going to see as I get in through these slides, the way the rate is structured in ordinance right now, and that's where the rate's located, is defined in ordinance. When it comes to that generation piece, that first piece of the electric grid, there's what's called a base rate. And you set a base rate so that typically the cost of power is never lower than that, because you don't want to be over collecting. And if so, you don't want to do it very often. So you have this base rate. But because we're buying electricity from a commodity market, it goes up and down, just like the price of gasoline goes up and down, sometimes even more. There's this thing that's the volatile piece, and it's this generation above the base rate. So if you take the base rate plus the generation above the base rate, and I'm going to show you this in pictures as we go along because it can be confusing if it's just words that I'm giving to you. Those two taken together is the total amount that NBU paid for generation in one particular month. And when we buy generation, we pass it through to our customers. There's no markup. So it's literally just a community service that we're providing for the community, is buying this power in ERCOT and passing it through. And I'll talk a lot about how that happens here in a moment. Then the next line item that you see there is called replenishing reserves. And reserves those are basically cash reserves that we have to manage through volatility in the market and also to respond to emergency events like Winter Storm Uri. And I'll talk about that and how that was handled here in a bit as we get into the presentation. Then there's the transmission costs. So moving on now to that second piece of the electric grid. The way transmission costs are set are by the state of Texas. So all of ERCOT, which is almost all of Texas, has this transmission grid. And each year, what the state does is they say, what is the total cost of transmission for the whole state? And then what they do is they divide that by how much energy each utility used over the course of the year. And so each utility is then assigned the cost for transmission. And so that happens for NBU each year. And so each year when we get that information from the state, that increases the transmission costs that we have incrementally year to year. Not a lot, but it's enough that it changes every year. So just like generation, within the ordinance, there's a base rate for transmission, and then there's this piece that moves a little bit each year to cover the increased amount of transmission costs that are assigned to us by the state. So all of those items are wrapped up in purchase power in the PCRA, which is why it's very confusing and why what we want to do is break this out so when a customer looks at their bill, they've got a real good understanding of what they're paying for and why. Then you get down to the last and final piece of the electric grid, and that's the distribution piece. That's the local wires. That's NBU. So there's two pieces of that. One is the delivery cost, and that's based on how much electricity was used. And then the final one, the last thing, is the service availability cost. And this is something that every utility has, water, sewer, electric, what have you. And it's just a flat fee, bless you. It's just a flat fee. So if there's no usage each month, there is a cost associated with just maintaining that meter and that service and that infrastructure that goes to that house. And so that's what the service availability cost is. And what I'm going to do over the next several slides is dig into all of this. So hopefully by the time we get through it, we've talked about it from a number of different angles that it all makes sense. What I'll do is I'll start with this slide. This is one that I showed at the city council meeting 2 meetings back. And what we're doing here with this slide is showing the breakdown of a residential electric bill, comparing that first column is July 2021 versus July 2022. And you can see the lines on the bottom, the gray one, the green one, and the one above it. Those are the smaller ones. So that's the distribution piece and part of the transmission. Then you look at the big blue one and the big orange one. So the blue one is the electric base rate. So going back to this, there's the generation base rate, the very top one on the right. And the next one is the generation above base rate, right? So the base rate is the blue one. And then the orange one is the generation above the base rate. So if you take both of those together, that is the total cost that NBU paid for power for that customer for that particular period of time. And the final one on top of it, we're calling on this slide, we're calling it Winter Storm Uri. I'm going to talk a lot about that in a future slide, about what happened during that week of Winter Storm Uri and what's happened every month since. And so what we have on this slide for July of 2021 and then July of 2022 is this amount that is within the PCRA, which is a recovery for Winter Storm Uri. So if you take the Winter Storm Uri piece and you take the orange piece, which is that cost of power above the base rate, what you have is the PCRA. So that's one slide. I'm going to move into some other ones to help try to paint a bigger, more complete picture what the PCRA is. Before I move off of this one, we've had a lot of lessons that we've learned, me personally, about how this summer has gone. And I want to tell you right now that in hindsight, NBU, I should have made the decision to recommend that we remove that Winter Storm Uri amount that we had in the PCRA for this summer because of everything else that was happening, because the increase of cost of power in the market in Texas and because of the extreme record heat that we were having. And I want to apologize for not doing that. We should have done that. So let me talk about the PCRA. Again, it's like the PCRA is sitting on this table, and we're going to walk around the table and look at it from a bunch of different angles to try to, hopefully everybody gets a real good understanding of what this thing is. So again, I'm going to kind of say the same thing, but in a different way. The PCRA is a variable rate, and it includes three things. The first is the total cost of power above what's collected through that base rate that's in ordinance. The second is the cost of electric transmission, which is set by the Public Utility Commission annually. And so you can see over there on the right how that stacks up. Dark blue on the bottom is generation, light blue is transmission. And then finally, the one on the top is either Uri recovery, if we were still paying back that short-term loan that we took out, or once that's paid back, then replenishing reserves. So you can see that in July, that amount on top we still had, which I wish we had taken out at that time, that was the final amount that we had in the bill to recover the full costs of the short-term debt that we took out to pay off Winter Storm Uri costs. At that point going forward, it's all replenishing reserves. So we made the decision in July to remove that extra cost from the PCRA to replenish those reserves. So what we've done is we've pushed pause on replenishing those reserves for the months of August and September. Now let's talk about the PCRA from another angle, right? So I'm going to kind of say the same thing but in a different way again, just to make sure it makes sense. This PCRA, that round thing on the bottom, there's three things that feed into that. And I hate that I've got to use two more four-letter acronyms, but it's somewhat complex, right? When we talk about the amount of generation above the base rate, there's actually a name for that. It's called the Generation Cost Recovery Factor. The acronym is GCRF. But basically, that's what I've been talking about this whole time, the amount of generation above the base rate. Then you go to the next one over, replenishing reserves. I talked about that just a moment ago. I think that's a little pretty straightforward. And then this piece I was talking about for the transmission costs that are above the base transmission rate. There's actually a four-letter acronym for that, TCRF. It stands for Transmission Cost Recovery Factor. And that changes annually. And I've got a slide here down the road in this presentation that'll show how both of those have changed. Actually, all of these have changed over time. We get this question a lot. What is the formula? And it's really just a simple subtraction. So you start with, in any given time, what is the total cost to NBU for the generation that we buy to serve the load in the community, the total cost of the transmission that we owe to the state to support and maintain the transmission network, and then whatever reserves are needed. We don't always have reserves in there, but I put that in there because it's very timely these days, post-Winter Storm Uri. So you take the total costs, and then you subtract from that revenue that's brought in from the base rate for generation and for transmission. Right now, that's called purchase power on the bill. And then what you have is a PCRA. It's a simple subtraction. So here's a common question. Why not cap the PCRA? It's a great question. So this PCRA, if you take that amount along with the base rate, what those two numbers do together is they reflect the total cost NBU pays electric generators for power. So that's what that is. It is the full amount. So the PCRA is not a fee, it's not a profit, it's nothing like that. It's simply the total cost that we pay generators to provide power for the community. So with that said, if the PCRA were capped below what NBU paid for power, then NBU would essentially be in default for non-payment. That's what that would mean. Now, what we can do and what we have done is we can change the rate at which we replenish reserves. But then again, it's a balancing act, right? Because reserves protect the community for significant events such as Winter Storm Uri. It also provides flexibility as we manage through the program. There's a lot on here, so let me explain each piece of this because I think it's an important slide. As we've shown this to people over the course of the week, this is a slide that we go back to often because once we get further into the presentation, this takes on even more meaning. So what we're showing here is the cost of power per month going back to 2018 for our NBU customers. So it's not the total amount of energy used, it's just the cost. And so the scale over there on the right is the dollars, it's the price per kilowatt hour. So let's talk about that word for just a minute, kilowatt hours. I think sometimes electricity, at least I know for me, electricity is not intuitive like something like water, right? When you talk about water, when you say gallons, everybody knows what a gallon is. That's the volume, right? So when you want to talk about how much water was used during the course of a month, you say gallons. But when you're talking about electricity, the word that you use instead of gallons is kilowatt hour. I know it's weird, right? But that's what it is. So when you say kilowatt hours, that's essentially a total volume of electricity used over the course of a period of time. So what we're showing here is the price per kilowatt hour. So what's not on here, you see this little note on the bottom, the availability charge, that fixed piece that's in $17 a month for every residential address, that's not on there because it's not variable, it's fixed. So what we do is we start with all the other items that I mentioned from the bill just a moment ago. So that bottom one, the green one, that's the delivery charge. So remember there was the generation, transmission, and distribution. Well, that green piece is the distribution system. And then once you get above that, once you get to the blue, that's the generation base rate. So now we're talking about the top of that electric grid slide I had at the beginning. And you can see the blue goes up and down. And the reason it goes up and down is because it's fixed in ordinance, but it's a little higher in the summer, and that's typical. That's typical of any electric rate, just because power costs more in the summer. It's a supply and demand thing, right? That's why the blue goes up and down, up and down, up and down, but the price is fixed in ordinance, which then takes us to the orange. The orange is that piece that I've been talking about that's included in the PCRA, that's the generation above the base rate. If you want to use an acronym, it's that generation cost recovery factor, right? So if we start over there in 2018, start in January of 2018, and start moving our way to the right, you can see that things are pretty stable. And then we get to 2020, and you start seeing some yellow appear. And what happened in 2020, early in 2020, is that our CFO came to us and said, hey, I'm seeing some things in the ERCOT market, and it concerns me. And it concerns me enough that we need to talk to our board about increasing the amount that we have in our reserves for our power supply program. Because like anything else, you have reserves to handle risk, right? And when you reassess risk, if the risk has increased, what you want to do is increase your reserves to an appropriate amount to reflect the new risk that you're facing. So you can see that back in 2020, January 2020, those yellow bars reflect where we were increasing the amount of our electric reserves. And what an incredible vision that our CFO had at that time, because what happened in February 2021 was Winter Storm Uri. So we went into Winter Storm Uri with even more reserves than we otherwise would have, because she had made that decision and she saw what was coming. So that takes us to March of 2021, the month after Winter Storm Uri. And what you start seeing appear there is that light blue, right? That light blue line, or that part of the bar. And you can see what we're calling that there. It's also part of the PCRA. It's called Uri recovery. And I'm going to talk about how we handled that again in a moment. I'll get to it. But what we did from March of 2021, everybody's bill started in March of 2021, all the way through July of 2022, the PCRA increased by that amount to pay off that short-term note. And it's done. So one of the pieces of feedback we got when we had this slide earlier this week was, it would be helpful to put a line on here to show what the total load was, how much energy was actually used over that same period of time. So that's what's going to be on the next slide. So just to keep in mind before I go to it, what you're looking at here is not load, it's the price per kilowatt hour. And I'm going to go to the next slide, and it's going to show this black curve. That's how much energy was used on the NBU system over that period of time. You can see it goes up, it goes down, it's seasonal, very weather dependent. We'll have all these on our website, all these slides. This is an interesting slide, y'all. So we're talking about base rate, right? Let's just talk about generation for a moment. Again, there's two pieces of it. There's the base rate that's fixed in ordinance, goes up a little bit in the summer, then back down, then up and down. And then you have the portion above the base rate, which is in the PCRA, which reflects the volatility in the market. That black line there that's horizontal means that if the blue line intersects that black line, it means that in that particular month, the base rate covered the total cost of generation completely. So there's no need to collect any more than the base rate. When the blue line is above the black line, what that means is the base rate was collecting more revenue than what was needed. In fact, In other words, the cost of power was actually less than what the base rate was bringing in. But then opposite that, if you look below the black line, if you see that blue line below the black line, what that means is that the base rate was not adequate. The cost of power was more than what the base rate could collect. And so you see things were pretty consistent over time, from January 2010 all the way up until 2018. And then finally, when things got very, very difficult at Winter Storm Uri, and that's that big, big dip that even goes off the chart. We had to change the scale. So you just have an orange line pointing down to show what happened during Winter Storm Uri. And then as you go even further out to the right, because costs have come up so much because of natural gas and other things going on, we're even more under recovered right now. So that might lead you to ask, well, why in the world aren't we changing the base rate? Great question. We are. And that's one of the items that the Rate Advisory Committee is working on right now. Okay, another chart that bears some explanation, but a very important one. Very important one. So what we have on here are two different lines. Let me start with the light blue one because it's the easiest one. I mentioned earlier, let me go back. I mentioned earlier that the PCRA has three things in it. And unfortunately, we got two more acronyms, right? So that one over there on the right, the transmission cost recovery factor, that's the amount above the base rate that has to be added within the PCRA to cover the total cost of transmission each year. So that's what that light blue line is. That's what that light blue line is. So you can see that it was pretty flat for a while, and then if you follow the news, you'll know that within the last 10 years or so, renewable generation has really taken off in Texas. In fact, we're one of the leaders in the nation for renewable energy. And a lot of that, as you know, is out in West Texas, Panhandle, South Texas, places like that. And when you build generation in those types of remote places, you have to build the transmission network up. You have to make it more robust to bring all that power back into what people call like this population triangle. You know, most of Texans, it's like 80-something% of Texans live in a triangle between San Antonio and Houston and Dallas, right? But all that generation is way out there. So a lot of transmission has been built to bring that generation into the population centers of Texas. And so you can see, about 10 years ago or so, that generation growth really took off. But still, it's very, very modest compared to everything else, but it does go up. And so that transmission portion of the PCRA is represented by that light blue line. Then the dark blue line, go back to that slide earlier, is that one on the left, the generation cost recovery factor, the GCRF, that part that represents the cost of generation above what was collected by the base rate. So that's what that blue line is. Now, a few interesting things here. You can see that even back in 2008, it went up as high as it had been up until just recently. I'll point out a couple other things too. If you look at 2013, you look at 2017, it actually went below zero. So there were periods of time when the cost of power in Texas was so low that the PCRA was negative because, as I showed you on this slide, there are times when the base rate is bringing in more than what we're actually having to pay for energy. But you can see what's happened in recent years, especially starting in Winter Storm Uri, and with all that's happening right now in global markets and other issues that are going on. I'll talk about that later in the presentation. That's why this GCRF is growing the way it is, and that's why the PCRA is growing like it is, and that's why what people are seeing on their bills right now is a PCRA that's bigger than their purchase power costs, which is very confusing. Why is that even happening, right? That's why it's happening. So let's talk about Uri recovery. There's a lot of words, a lot of numbers on here. What I want, the takeaway from this slide is two things. Number one, during that week in February of 2021, NBU's costs for energy were equivalent to our annual budget for energy. And it wasn't just a New Braunfels thing. If you follow the news, it was across the entire state. So you can see that quote that we've got down there from Forbes. It showed that excess energy costs in the market in Texas during that week were somewhere in the order of $16 to $26 billion. So what happened during Winter Storm Uri, and you saw what happened. You saw the legislation that came out and all the changes that have been being made since then. This was a significant event. So that's what happened. That was NBU's portion of that event during that period. So what did we do about it? I mentioned earlier, there were two ways that we paid for it, because this is how it works. You buy power from these generators and it flows through the ERCOT market, okay? So you buy the power February 2021, you got to pay it in March of 2021. You can't not pay it. Otherwise you'll be in default, and then that's an even bigger problem. So in March of 2021, we had to make a payment for $93 million. How did we do that? We did it with two different things. The first was our cash reserves, $43 million worth that we had. And fortunately, as I mentioned earlier, because of the decision that was made, we had even more available than we otherwise would have, which left a shortcoming of $50 million. So what the decision was at that time was to take out a short-term note. Some folks finance it over 30 years, and that's fine. It's whatever was best for each utility. And I'll show you why we ended up doing the $50 million note next. Well, let me show you this first. So what we're showing you here is the different milestones we had in our recovery plan at that time. So on the left column, the column heading is as of date, or it says that there. There's three different milestones that we had put out in the recovery plan when we first kicked this off. And then you can see these milestones moved. We had the original milestones in April of 21, and then we had to relook at it in April of 22. And as the market has continued to change, we've had to continue to move these milestones, and we're moving these in response to what's happening in the market. As energy prices have gone up, we have to keep a balance. On the one hand, yeah, we got to pay off the note, yeah, we got to fill the reserves, but we also have to protect our electric customers, right? We can't collect for the note and collect for the reserves at the same rate if power prices are going up, because it's a double whammy. So I'll go through these three milestones that are on the left there. The first is the target for collecting the $50 million of the taxable note. So which is some feedback I got when we were showing this to some people this week was, don't call it that. What is the taxable note? It's like a line of credit is what that is. That's what a taxable note is. So the original date back in April of 21 that we would have collected the $50 million, had the market not done what it's been doing, we would have collected it by March of 2022. But because of the changes that have happened, the volatility, the increased cost, that pushed it all about to July of 22. And then there were two other milestones that we have here. The middle one there on the left is there's this word here that you see on the slide. It says Power Stabilization Fund. What that means is reserves. We have reserves for different parts of the organization to be responsive to certain types of risks that we face. So the reserves that we have set aside for our power supply program, we call that the Power Stabilization Fund. That's why that reads that way. So that target for the $20 million was originally November of 2022, and we've had to push that all the way out to July of next year. We have just over $700 in there right now, not $20 million. And then the target Power Stabilization Fund full date, so when we're going to have the full amount in there, we originally planned on fiscal year 26, and that has now moved to fiscal year 30. We've had some questions. Why 365 days? Why is that your new target, NBU? Why do you want 365 days worth of power cost in your fund? And it's because of this. It's because in 1 week in February 2021, we incurred power costs equivalent to our annual budget. And because of that, we had to take out debt. We had to take out a loan and pay interest on that. So the idea behind building up a cash reserve that big is it insulates all of us customers from that type of event in the future. So moving on to this next slide. So another question that we've gotten quite a bit, which is a great question. Hey, all these other folks are doing 20-year, 30-year notes, 30-year debt. Why did you collect it so quickly, NBU? What we're showing here is two different scenarios. The blue line is the recovery plan that we put in place and that we've been following so far. The orange line is what the recovery plan would have looked like if we had taken out a 30-year bond. So you can see that starting in fiscal year 21, so if you'll remember, if we go back to this, it's such an important slide. You see the big red arrow flying around there, y'all? See that? That light blue is when we started collecting that $50 million. So starting in March of 2021, all the way through this July, that's been in customers' bills, okay? So that blue line right there that you see at this point, that's been in there. And then fiscal year 22. that fiscal year we just ended up in July. So the plan is to drop that amount that we're collecting to fill the reserve. So our fiscal year right now, 23, started August 1st, so we're currently in fiscal year 23. So that amount drops to 1.3 cents per kilowatt hour. That's the scale that we have over here, just for fiscal year 23. And then in fiscal year 24, it drops to less than a penny. It's 0.75 cents is what it is. And then the plan is to have that fund full in fiscal year 2030. If we had done the 30-year bond, you can see that we would be, I think I'd be dead by the time this thing was done. And I'm that old. And so the other part of that too is by doing the short-term note instead of the 30-year bond, it saved a total of $44 million in interest payments. And to put that into context, $44 million is like a wastewater treatment plant expansion. That's big money. It's a big deal. So all of that went into the thought process behind that. So what does that look like on a bill? Right now, we don't have it in there at all, right? Remember that earlier? We took it out for the months of August and September, so that pushes things back a little bit. But when it comes time to put it back in there, I'd mentioned that for fiscal year 23, so that's right now through the end of next July, the plan is to have 1.3 cents per kilowatt hour. So that's this right here. And that correlates to this right here. And that is on an average residential bill over the course of years, 1,200 kilowatt hours, it's about $15.60 on an average residential bill. And then after this fiscal year, so starting August 1st, 2023, it drops to this point right here, which is less than a penny. It's 0.0075, and that's about $9 on an average residential bill. And that goes out until 2030 when the fund is full. So that's what that plan looks like. Which leads to the next question. What is NBU's bond rating? We had, over the course of the summer, there's three rating agencies. I'm sure many of you are probably familiar with them. They all came in here this summer, about one per month or so, and they redid their audit of us and came up with a new bond rating. So what we have here, and we corrected this, we actually had something wrong in this earlier this morning. Here are the three rating agencies over here: S&P, Fitch, and Moody's. S&P. First of all, let me just point out this outlook thing. Some folks, if they've heard of bond ratings, they know the rating. There's the A and the AA and all that stuff. But something that usually is not reported on is the outlook. They go hand in hand with one another. You can see that we've had this negative outlook, but it's not because we're NBU. It's because pretty much most electric companies in the state of Texas have had a negative outlook since Winter Storm Uri. And it's just because of uncertainty in the market right now. It's not because anything is bad. It's just that rating agencies like certainty, because they're kind of putting their name on the line and saying whatever they're saying about an organization. So although it says negative, that basically means we're a utility in Texas right now. That's basically what that means. So S&P, they affirmed our rating. So we have a pre-summer rating and then the current one. They affirmed it, negative and negative for the outlook. Fitch dropped us from a AA to a AA minus, but interestingly, they improved our outlook from negative to stable. This was the error we had this morning. We had negative, but it's actually stable. And then Moody's affirmed us. Now I want to point out these 2 points here at the bottom. They're important. You can see these rating agencies, they're talking about liquidity. That's another word for reserves. And they're basically saying, hey, NBU, if you want to maintain this rating, you have got to get your liquidity, you've got to get your reserves back to pre-Winter Storm Uri levels. Okay, got it. We hear you. So they're giving us that message, and it's important. It's this balance, right? I mean, on the one hand, $15.60 and $9 on a bill, that's not inconsequential. That's real money. On the other hand, if a bond rating drops, we end up paying more for a variety of reasons. The biggest is because our financing costs go up. And so it's a balance that you got to take when you're trying to evaluate all this. So Fitch, one of the things that all of us in the utility business have access to is this comparison of Fitch ratings among different utility companies. So Fitch is the one that dropped us. They're the only one that dropped us. But let me show you how we compare. They dropped us to a AA negative. It's an eye chart. You can't read it. I'm sorry. Again, it's the English paper, right? If I just keep revising this thing, it'd be perfect after I don't know how many days. If you look, there's nobody in the AA plus category. In the AA category, prior to this summer, it was only Austin Energy and NBU. And Fitch just dropped us to AA minus. So we are now with Bryan, Texas Utilities, CPS Energy, Garland Power and Light, Pedernales Electric. That's where we are now, this one right here. Down here, A+, we got Brownsville, City of Denton, and GVEC. Brownsville comes up in our presentations from time to time because they're the only utility in Texas like us. They have water, sewer, and electricity under a board, so it's kind of a good benchmark for us, good comparison. That's why we have them on there. I know you're wondering, they're way down the valley. Why are we talking about them up here in New Braunfels? That's why. And then Seguin is A-. So we're in pretty good company here. Okay, why are my bills higher this summer? This is top of mind. I've wanted to get through all of that other information first because I think it helps inform this next discussion pretty well. There's really three things going on. Number one, after Winter Storm Uri happened, the state of Texas came in and passed a lot of legislation, which they handed off the Public Utility Commission of Texas, which regulates ERCOT. And there's a lot of work going on right now among those entities to redesign the ERCOT market to prioritize reliability over price. They're doing a lot of good work around that. But it's a trade-off, right? Reliability has a cost to it. So as you increase reliability, price has to go up too. There's no way to increase reliability without increasing price. And so that alone has caused prices to go up in ERCOT. And then the price of natural gas. One of the questions that we've gotten over the last couple weeks is, NBU, I'm looking at this trend line. It's been higher than that before. Why are you telling me the bills are higher right now? The reason is because, and by the way, I just read an article right before I came here, and it's from the U.S. Energy Information Administration, which a lot of this data comes from. It's an incredible database. They had an article today that said the volatility in the natural gas market right now is the highest it's been in 20 years. Highest it's been in 20 years because of everything that's going on. I know that I mentioned the war in Ukraine at the council meeting, and that got some laughs, got some chuckles from people, but it's real. And the reason that matters is because the United States is exporting natural gas to Europe right now. And I was just watching an interview with General Petraeus. He's one of the key, I think, people who has information on what's going on over there these days, talking about, and a former ambassador, they're kind of talking about, well, what's happening over there? And they were saying, this winter is going to be an important thing to watch in Europe. Really important thing to watch. Can the Europeans get through winter without relying on Russian exports? And we will see. Time will tell. That's the thing about these commodity markets. You don't really know until you go through it. But the point being, we had gas in 2020 at $3. It's now close to 10. I think it might have hit 10, somewhere around 10 this week. Folks, that's a 3-time increase. That is incredible. And it's happening because a number of reasons. One of the big ones is that we are exporting natural gas overseas now, right? That's one, and it's a global commodity. So yeah, we produce a lot of it here domestically, but it's sold on a global market, so its price is set globally. So anyway, back to the question of, hey, NBU, it's been that high before. Why are you trying to tell us that's making a difference right now? It's because in the last 5 to 10 years, the ERCOT generation fleet, in other words, the mix of electric generation types in the state of Texas, has changed in a very big way. So years ago, you pretty much had natural gas and coal. Those were the predominant generation sources within ERCOT. Where we stand today, what's happened is fracking came along, right? And that's why gas got so cheap. That's why power was so cheap, because of fracking. Natural gas became abundant. And coal, it wasn't competitive anymore. So you probably heard a lot about retirements of coal plants. It's simply because they weren't economically competitive anymore. So they started being retired to where we are now in a situation in the ERCOT market where 30% of the generation fleet is renewable, and about 44% or so is natural gas, 42, 44, somewhere around there. Here's why that's important. When you're sitting in the control room at ERCOT, you've got a really important job. You've got a really important job. You've got to maintain the stability of the electric grid to prevent outages. And the way you do that is, you can't really store electricity on any big scale these days. Someday batteries will probably get us there, but not right now. So they are constantly, minute by minute, adjusting generation to match the load. Incredible job those folks have up there at their control center. And the way they do that, one of the main ways they do that, there's a lot of things they can do, but one of the ways they do that, primary ways, is they call the generator and they say, hey, load's picking up, need you to pick up. Well, you can't do that at a solar farm. And you can't do that at a wind farm, because the wind's either blowing and the sun's shining and it's full on, full gas, not gas, that's the wrong word, full steam ahead, right? Or it's not. But a power plant, a thermal power plant, That's called dispatchable, meaning they can call from the control room at ERCOT and say, we need you to ramp up. We need you to generate some more because the demand's going up, right? Well, natural gas has become the dispatchable resource in ERCOT right now. They're it. There's some coal, there's some nuclear, but natural gas really is the one. And that has made them that much more important because 30% of the thermal generation, the dispatchable generation, is gone. It's been replaced by renewables. That's why natural gas prices are so important in the market. So back in June, some of y'all have seen this chart before too. This also was put out by the Energy Information Administration back in June. And what they were doing, they saw the signs coming. Even the cost of coal was going up in early summer. They saw prices going up. And so they made this forecast back in June of what was going to happen to energy prices across the nation. So what you see over there on the left are these different power markets in the United States. And then you see that little picture of the U.S. over there. There's little lines drawn to where each one is. Then what you see next to it is the first number, the number on the left, is the price in each one of those markets in summer 2021 last year. And to the right is the forecasted number for this summer. The reason I put this up there is to show that what's happening with natural gas is affecting the entire nation. So you see ERCOT right there, the number in 2021 was $54, and what was forecasted for this summer is $90. I'll show you in just a minute what we're actually seeing. But it's happening across the country right now. And then finally, the other thing affecting electric bills across the state this summer is this oppressive, punishing heat that we've had. This has been the worst summer I can remember. We have had 3 months in a row where each month set a record for temperature. What in the world? I can't ever think of a time that's happened before. We toured the ERCOT offices and control room years ago, and we were just talking with their folks there. One of the questions we asked was, well, what drives power to, energy to, usage to go up in the summer? And the answer was plain and simple, super quick, residential AC. That's what they said. It was really interesting. Of all the industries in Texas and of all the commercial businesses in Texas, residential AC is the predominant driver that they told us that day of the electric load in ERCOT. So this is what it looks like locally in New Braunfels. The gray bar is the amount of residential electric usage in 2021. The blue bar is the amount this summer. And you can see the months April, May, June, and July. So in July alone, the amount of electricity used was 32% greater than last summer. So all that other stuff I just got through talking about, natural gas, the market, blah, 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 all that other stuff, if all of that stuff didn't even happen, bills would have been 32% higher on average simply because of this doggone heat that we've had this summer. Next question we get often is, how long is this going to last? We're asking the same thing. I think pretty much everybody in the electric industry is asking the same exact question. Because it's a commodity market, nobody really knows. What people do is they forecast. And so what we see here, and the folks on the team that put this together put those red letters on the bottom. This is a forecast only, but we want to put something out there to give some kind of idea to our customers, to the community, what we're seeing. You can see that the prices are not expected to dip much. In fact, all the indicators we're seeing with the global politics and other things going on that are affecting the market, it's not predicted to move much in the next year. Now, hopefully what will move, and what we have seen move this month, is temperature. So those volumes, the amount of kilowatt hours being used, are already starting to come down just because the temperatures come down. All right, here's the next common question. How do NBU's retail prices compare? One of the questions, this comes up all the time. One of the dry runs we did of this presentation this week was why is my aunt in Marble Falls paying less? Why is GVEC less? Why is so-and-so less? So I want to talk about that. So right here, what you see here is a list of, and this is the city council meeting too. Some of y'all might have seen this already. What we have here are different electric utility companies that sell retail electricity. The yellow ones up there at the top, and this is an average bill for August of 2022. So the yellow ones are the electric co-ops. So you have PEC and GVEC. The blue ones are the municipal utilities. So moving from top to bottom, you've got Austin Energy, and then green, the orange one there is NBU. So you get to NBU, then you get to CPS Energy, Again, Brownsville shows up just because they're a lot like us and it's a good benchmark. The green one's the average, and then the red ones are the top 4 by customer count for-profit retail electric providers in the state of Texas. So you can see where NBU ranks right now. And look at it another way. This is kind of a graphic. If you look at it, well, let me show you this first before we get on to the next one. This kind of shows you historically where NBU's ranked. The orange line is NBU. All right, the green line are the average price of the 4 biggest municipal utilities in the state of Texas. The blue line is the average price of the 4 biggest electric cooperatives in the state of Texas. And then the gray line are the 4 biggest for-profit retail electric providers in the state of Texas. So what you can see there is that over time, NBU's price has literally been one of the lowest prices in the state of Texas. It has gone up. And we're right now pretty much right in line exactly with the average of the top 4 electric co-ops. So you might ask, whether you're looking at this or you're looking at that, what makes a difference? What makes one utility higher or lower than the other one? Well, there's no, again, this is August 2022, so there is no Winter Storm Uri recovery or reserves or anything in this. So it's not at all based on Winter Storm Uri. The difference here, and I've not, these utility companies don't share the details of their hedging program because it's confidential, because it's a market, right? It's kind of like if they were going to go buy real estate, they don't tell the whole world what their negotiating position is because it would make it more expensive for them. But if NBU was the lowest all those times, and now we're higher than some of these, what that means is the difference between the amount at any given time is the average length of their hedges that they've bought, right? How long they bought out. And so one of the folks that we gave this presentation to this week, he had this great insight. He said, say it this way, Ian. Because he said, am I understanding this correctly? Let me tell you what I think you're saying. And I said, yeah, that's exactly right. And he goes, well, then say that. So this was his analogy. He said, it's like gasoline. Gasoline, like electricity, goes up and down. Sometimes at the gas station, they'll change the price midday. It's that kind of thing. It goes up and down like it's volatile, just like that. So you may have 2 cars drive past us out here on Seguin Avenue tonight. One of them, they might have filled up back in July. They still got gas in their tank. And that gas in that tank costs $4.90. The other one goes by, the next one goes by, they filled up earlier this morning. Well, the gas in their tank costs $3.20, right? So it's all about when that gas is purchased. And so we've been low for a long, long time, and we're starting to move up, but we're not the highest. But it's all a matter of how long these hedges are. So you might ask, why are the red ones so much higher? Well, I don't know exactly, but I think there's 2 things that are going on. Number one, first of all, they have profit built in their rates. There's no profit in ours. It's a direct pass-through. There's no profit in the other municipal utilities or the co-ops in here. So there's profit in there. But the other thing, too, I think, you know, these electric co-ops and the municipal utilities, you kind of know how many customers you're going to have because you kind of know what growth is going to be. And because you know that, you know how much power you're going to need. Well, if you're a for-profit retail electric provider, you don't exactly know how many customers you're going to have far out, right? I mean, because we have a pretty good idea, we can hedge pretty far out, 15 years or so. But if I'm a retail electric provider, man, I'm not hedging that. Maybe they do, I don't know, but that's a risky thing because you don't know if you're going to even be in business at that point, right? And if so, how many customers you're going to have. So again, it's all about the length of the hedges. Now, at some point, everybody catches up to the market because your hedges all run out eventually. There's no way to avoid the market. At some point, your truck runs out of gas, you got to go to the gas station. And if it's at $4.90, there's nothing you can do. You gotta buy it. So the question really is, you know, it's not possible to have the lowest rate all the time. There's just no hedging program that does that for you. So what you got to do is look at how has the program performed over time. And that's what this is. And that's why. And so when you look at this, you got to ask, is NBU providing the best value over time? Well, here's another way of looking at it. What you're seeing here, ERCOT operates what's called a day-ahead market and a real-time market. What that means is you can go in at any given time and buy power for the next day. And the price is out there. It's online. You can see it. Can't miss it. You can buy real time too. That's exactly what it means. Real time, right? You can't store it. So real time, that's the price. So the orange line is the day-ahead price of electricity in ERCOT. The blue line is the real-time price of energy in ERCOT. And then the gray bars our NBU's total blended cost of power based on blending all of our hedges together and coming up with the price, the total price of the energy that we have. And the point here, if you're a municipal utility, if you're a co-op, you do not try to beat the market. That's like playing the stock market with public funds. That's not what you want to do. What you want to do, we have two goals for our power supply program. Number one is reduce volatility, and number two, deliver a competitive price. So what you're not looking for is to have the gray bars below the blue and orange all the time, because you're going to lose. You don't play the stock market again with public funds, but what you want to do is you want to follow the market. And when things go bad, you want to be insulated from those times it went bad. So I'll point out to you, if you look at that, I got my pointer here. If you look at this point right here when the market spiked, our program was properly hedged and we were protected from all of this. If you look at Winter Storm Uri, again, Winter Storm Uri is always so big it never even fits on the chart. It's so doggone big. So what they did when they made this slide is they put the numbers here. NBU's price in February 2021 was $329. The real time was 1882. The day ahead was 1827. Incredible work our power supply team did around the clock to protect the utilities and our community from those prices. And if you look at right now what's been happening for the last few months for this summer, look at what's going on in ERCOT. It is just taking off right now because that's what happens. It's a commodity market. It responds to certain events. But look also at how the NBU hedging program has insulated us and protected us from a lot of this. I'll talk more about that as the presentation goes on. Now I want to look at price comparisons just one last time. So this is all of a bar chart. I'm basically going to take this information and I'm going to put it in a table. Now you're going to see pretty quick these four retail electric providers, they're different. They changed because when we first started doing this for this table, the top four were different back then. Every month there's a different top four. I don't know how often it changes, but when we first created this, these are the top four retail electric providers. And if you rank this all from 2015 to 2021, NBU is the lowest. You saw earlier, if you go back to 2010, we were the lowest. So we were right here at this time, and then if you go to August of 2022, we moved up, and I'm showing you basically the same thing I showed you in the last slide. Austin, PEC, GVC. Now what I did here is I compared them side by side. And the reason I compared them side by side is I don't want to show you the ranking on here. That's not what's important. What I want to show you is how the bill changed month to month, okay? I mean over that time period. So NBU went from 9 cents to almost 14 cents, right? But look at some of these down here. They went from 13 cents to 28, 13 to 27. And again, it's all about how long out you're hedging your power. And even when you're hedging, you don't always want to go long, because that's the question everybody in this market is asking right now. How far out do we go? Well, the answer to that question is the market going to go up or down? And that's how these programs are managed. All right, what we wanted to do here, and we've shown this before too, what we're trying to show, NBU provides three lines of service: water, sewer, and electricity. There are one of the criticisms we got of this slide. Well, what if you got Green Valley? What if you got Crystal Clear? What if you got Springs Hill? What if you got one of these other water purveyors? Well, there are 13 water purveyors between and including Austin and San Antonio, right? So we could have gone, Green Valley Water, GVC Electric, and GVRA Sewer. All these permutations of what we could have put up here, and we decided, let's just put Austin, San Antonio, and NBU, some big metro areas, on the corridors. That's how we arrived at what we have on this slide here. So this top scenario, if you take August, average electric for back in July, average residential wastewater, and essential water use, meaning no irrigation, that's roughly 6,000 gallons. NBU is tied with San Antonio for basically the utility bill for all those. Austin was the lowest. If you water your lawn, that's this scenario down here. Everything's the same, except we're assuming 25,000 gallons of water. NBU's got the lowest bill out of those three. Just to give you kind of an idea of what the overall utility looks like.
Except for the PCRA.
So here's the next, everything's in there. Everything's in there. It's all in cost. Why does an NBU have to compete for its customers? Great question. About 20 years ago, the legislature deregulated the electric market. There's two markets, okay? There's this wholesale market where the electricity, that's what I've been talking about a lot today, ERCOT, right? All this electricity is generated and then people buy it. And NBU is active in that. We have a hedging program. That's what I've been talking about tonight. Then there's the retail electric market, okay? And when the state of Texas deregulated the retail electric market, what they did was they recognized that there are certain cities within Texas that own the electric utility. We all in New Braunfels, the people that came before us in 1942, spent money, bond funds, to buy the electric system in 1942. And we've been investing, all of us, now, and the people who came before us, in this electric system since 1942. It's ours. We own it. We get to come together and do things like this because we own it. We get to go to council and talk about it. Get to go to the board meeting and talk about it. Same thing with the electric co-ops. If you've read about the history of how those were developed in this country and in this state, it's fascinating. We got to the point in this nation where we had a split. People had electricity and people who didn't. Can you imagine? And we talk about broadband now. Think about electricity, right? So these electric co-ops sprung up. So you can have light and you can have all these things. So you don't have to carry water and these kinds of. These people at these co-ops invested in those utilities for decades. So when the legislature created the retail electric markets, the competitive markets, they said, okay, we get it. Members of the co-ops and citizens in the communities where these are owned by the customers, y'all have option. You have the option. You can either do what's called opt-in to competition, meaning you no longer serve retail electric service and you allow competition in your community, or you continue to serve, all right? Those are the two options. So let's talk about what that would look like. What would happen if NBU opted in? That means the decision was made that NBU would no longer provide energy, provide electricity from the markets and supply those needs to our community. The first thing I'll say is it would be an irreversible decision made by council. There's no, oh gosh, I wish we didn't do that. Can we have that back? It's done. It's over. The second thing I'll tell you is that if we did that, all of NBU's electric customers would need to select and contract with a for-profit retail electric provider to supply power to their homes or businesses. The third thing I'll tell you is that NBU, we'd have a choice. We could either compete for customers or we could just give up that business altogether. But I showed you those red bar earlier, right? Those bars, quite a bit higher than us. So one decision might be, well, gosh, I mean, if you're paying that much for electricity, why would you not buy power from NBU if it's that much lower? But I don't know. That's a risky thing to do. Again, that's taking public funds and making a big gamble. I don't know that we'd want to do that. NBU would still own, operate, and maintain the electric. Remember the early slide? There was generation, transmission, and distribution. We would be giving up the generation portion, but we'd still have the transmission and we'd still have the distribution portion. But the biggest part of the bill would be gone, and it would be others would be providing that for the community. And then water and wastewater would remain unchanged. I showed this in the council meeting too because I think it's totally relevant to this discussion. What we're seeing here on this table is NBU's total operating expenses for last fiscal year, ending July 31st, 2022. Most companies, the biggest piece of the biggest portion of their expenses are their personnel, just paying their workforce. But you can see at NBU it's only 14%. You see that right here. The biggest portion by large of our expenses are what it takes to buy power in the market and pass it through, no markup to our customers. So it's the base rate plus the PCRA. So if we were to opt in to competition and do away with this part of our business, all of that would go away. The need for the reserves would go away. The rating agencies would stop talking about it when they came and talked to us. All that would go away. Capital programs. We're getting a little bit off topic here, but this has come up multiple times, and so I want to put some slides in here, especially because it'll be on our website, so people can access it if they like. What this is a look at. So let me take a step back. So capital is, I think if this is new to you, let me explain this a little bit. Capital is like, if you look at your home finances, it's like a mortgage. Whereas O&M, operations and maintenance, it's more of cash, groceries and gasoline, stuff like that. Capital are expenditures that we make for building plants and pipes and pumps and poles and wires and that kind of thing. This is infrastructure, right? So if you look backwards, that's the last 10 years of what we've spent. Looking forwards, that's the next 10 year of what's proposed. And the different colors are the different lines of business. So orange is electric, blue is water, green is wastewater, and then gray is support, and then yellow is equipment. What I want to point out is that the biggest on here, you can see this, is water and wastewater. And some of y'all are aware that there's this thing called an impact fee that's allowed by the local government code, and it allows folks like us to assess a fee to developers to pay for their impact to the water and sewer systems. It's not allowed for electric by law, but it is for water and wastewater. We've had them for a long, long time around here, and we're in the middle of an update to it. and the proposed increase is significant. So we're going through that process right now with our board and the Impact Fee Advisory Committee, and then City Council. So you'll see that show up on City Council agendas this fall. If you're interested, please come out and be a part of that. This is that same exact information, but it's numbers on a table. I'm not going to bore you by reading them to you, but it's summed up by line of business, by year. The totals are all in there because, well, the Herald reported this, and I saw this on a news release. Well, these are the numbers. This is what's been approved by our board in the 5-year financial operating plan this past June. Rate Advisory Committee, you have questions. We've had questions on this too. What is this and why does this exist? This is the first time this has ever happened in New Braunfels. So our board wanted to put together a committee of representatives of customers, all different types of customer groups and classes, to provide input on this process. Because in the past, it was NBU would hire experts in rate design, and they'd come in and we'd work with them and we'd put together all this stuff and we would talk about priorities, and from there we would put together rates and we'd take them to our board and we'd take them to council. Well, it'd be a lot better, our board thought, and I think City Council did too, is it sure would be nice if we had a public process before it even got to the board, much less council. That's what this Rate Advisory Committee is. So we modeled this after rate advisory committees and bylaws of rate advisory committees from some very significant utilities. And I feel like we have some terrific bylaws. The role of this group is to serve one of the criticisms I've heard of this rate advisory committee is these people don't know anything about utilities. Well, that's kind of the point. What the rate advisory committee's role is to be experts of their customer group so they can advocate for their customer group when it comes to looking at the cost of service, analyzing rate designs, so they can provide those comments to the board and City Council. We'll answer all these questions. I'll be here all night, so we can answer all these questions. So there's a total of 18 of them. They're appointed by the Board of Trustees. 11 were nominated by the board, and they are different parts of commercial and industrial customers, so different industries and such that we have in New Braunfels. The 7 that were nominated by each council member were representatives of the residential class. So they selected somebody from their constituency to represent residential interests. All of this will be vetted in public meetings, whether it be the Rate Advisory Committee or the Board of Trustees or City Council. And this committee will serve on a voluntary basis. It's something that's going to be perpetual and continuing as time goes on, the way we see this. They're working right now. They've just ramped up their work. They'll work throughout the fall and then bring recommendations to the board and the city in the winter and spring of 2023. And then finally, what is NBU doing to help customers? There's a lot that I want to talk about here, y'all. The first thing I'll tell you is this is something that this whole situation this summer has been very troubling for all of us at NBU. We had 50 people, we had 70 people want to come and volunteer because they care so much. I've got my counterpart at the utilities down in San Antonio. I think the world of him, and I'm gonna steal one of the things he says pretty often because I think it sums up so well what we feel. And he basically says, you know, we love you guys and we care about you. And even if you hate our guts, we're going to do everything we can to try to make you proud of us to be your utility provider. That's how we feel. And I think you'll see that in these folks that have showed up tonight. I know you've had questions. Y'all have been yelling at me throughout this, and there's going to be plenty of people. I'll be back there. We can answer all these questions that you have. What I want to do, go through are some of the specific things that we've done and plan to do going forward. First item that I have here is this whole PCRA thing. You saw earlier in the presentation, we lowered it in August and September, and that's going to delay replenishing the reserves, but we should have done it earlier. Again, I apologize for that.
20% is not lowering.
The next thing we did is we've waived late fees through September. This is kind of the COVID protocol too. You know, when COVID happened and there were so many troubling things going on, there were a lot of things that we saw that helped, and we're replicating those here. We've got extension plans for our customers. A number have taken advantage of that. In fact, we have customer service representatives here that are available to help with that. We're not disconnecting, meaning we're not shutting off utilities for folks for not paying. We've always had this budget billing. So for folks who would like to level their bills and pay the same amount every month, we have a program that will help with that. We also have this utility bill assistance program. It has continued to be funded. There was a misunderstanding at one point that it ran out of money. It did not. It's fully funded. In fact, we met with the McKenna Foundation and some others in this community last week, and talked over this with them and said, hey, listen, if NBU's funds start to be depleted through the year, are there other funds available we can bring in? And the answer is yes. So we feel very good that we can keep this thing funded throughout the year and make sure that program is available. There's some other resources here. If folks want to set if they want to put some programming in place for their meter, so when they hit a certain amount of usage or a certain dollar amount, we can have that program so you'll get a message on your phone and let you know that has happened. Obviously, there's lots of conservation stuff that we have available. We can do these home assessments where we'll do a deep dive on your energy and water use, offer detailed analysis. We'll come to your home, we'll look over and see if there's some opportunities to do things, programming timers, offering these rebates that we have, and see if there's good rebates that match up with needs of a particular home. And then we have some items here going forward. The first thing here is communication. I'm going to tell you right now that we're committed to doing a better job of communicating with our customers in advance. We missed this. I missed this. I take responsibility for this, and I'm sorry. I apologize for this. We did not adequately communicate about changes that were happening in the market this summer and what the weather was doing to volumes, the amount of electricity used on impact bills. We're committed to doing better at that. I talked quite a bit earlier about the bill redesign. The line items on that bill right now are confusing, and we are going to redesign that, and once we get that dialed in, we're going to roll that out this fall, so it'll be a lot clearer if people understand what's going on their bill. Market changes. I talked a lot about ERCOT and what's been going on there. We've been active since the week of the winter storm in February 2021 all the way through now and engaged in these regulatory changes being made within the market. And we're going to continue to do that to protect our customers and our community. We've brought in outside expertise to assist with that. We currently have a team of 3 independent market experts that we're consulting with to navigate through the changing market conditions. I just got a briefing from one of them just this week to get a heads up on, okay, this is what's going on here, this is what it means to the market, this is what it means in total cost to NBU if this is implemented, this has already been implemented, this is how you hedge against that kind of thing. And the whole idea is to shield our customers from these increased power costs. You remember that slide earlier where the ERCOT costs were going up and we were able to maintain those NBU costs. And then finally, this is something that we had been in the works for a while now, and it's very timely because we solicited proposals to bring in a third party to evaluate all aspects of our power supply program. I told the power supply team, I said, I literally want the best in the world. The best we can get in the world. Because you saw how big this program is in dollars to the utility and to the community. So we made the selection of the best qualified consultant, and we've made that selection. I've spoken to some on city council and said, hey, I think it'd be a really neat idea if when they finish their work this fall, if they could come and present this to city council. Because it is truly a third party, let's pull back the curtains and look at everything, top to bottom, forward to back, and give an assessment of what this program is that NBU has. And if there are opportunities to do better, that's why we brought them in, so we can talk about that as well. So that's the end of my slides. We have, like I said, a whole team in the back here. I'm gonna go back there myself, so if y'all please head that way through those back doors. If you got questions, I'd love to meet you. I'd love to visit with you, and thanks you all for coming.